Welcome back. I'm Joseph Patrick Daniels, and this is part 2 of how to easily draw and shade noses. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, please jump back to the previous video. Again, this exercise is part of a larger course I teach on traditional drawing I've created for beginners, how to draw from beginner to master. It's available online on demand, so if you'd like to watch a preview of the course, just click the link below and it will take you to my site. Okay, I'll jump right back in from where I left off in the previous video. And next, I'll begin shading in these wrinkles on the top of the nose. The first thing I'll do is define my lines a bit more. Remember, the lines you draw shouldn't be any darker than the value of the shadow around them. So these lines should still be very light. You don't want her to appear to have deep, dark creases in her nose. That would look unnatural. These are very light lines on a young woman's nose who's wrinkling her face, not a weathered old man scowling. When you're shading, it's important to think in 3 dimensions. Think about each one of these lines is. It's a light coming from this direction, hitting a bump in a surface, leaving one side of that bump in shadow. This effect is simply happening 3 times in a row for these 3 bumps. Visualization is an important skill to develop while learning to draw, and one aspect of drawing that you'll take with you into the rest of your life. This is all already outlined. I'm just filling in the shapes I defined during the line art stage. That's one of the reasons using this technique makes the shading stage so much easier than many other approaches. Most of the decisions are already made for you at this point, so you can just focus on getting the right values and making minor adjustments to the shapes at this point in the process. And the shapes close off right about here with a very light value. Now I can move on to the shading on the front of the nose. Keep in mind this is toned paper, so this value is actually closer to 5th. So to achieve it, I have to use a very light touch. Again, I'm using an extended overhand grip, which just means I'm holding my pencil further back to give myself more pressure control. I'll fill in the nostril using a medium charcoal. Don't go too dark with nostrils because that makes them feel dominant. When drawing a person's face, you want their eyes to have the darkest values on the page, to draw your viewer's eye directly to them. You don't want your subject's nostrils to be competing for attention with their eyes. There's a light shadow down here, leaving that light shape in the middle. I'll omit that later with my detail eraser. There's another very light line here as well. There's a line here, but it's very light and has a soft edge, so I'll scumble that in to create the effect. Be sure to dab away any lines you can still see from the pencil drawing with a kneaded eraser. Same goes for this shape. It's not a line, it's a shadow, so its edges are soft. Just fill it in with a light value. These lines up here are about the same value as the paper, so leave them for now and we'll get the effect by shading around them with a white charcoal pencil later. Okay, that looks like a good start. Take a step back, observe, and compare your work to the reference. I'm seeing a few very minor angles I can adjust slightly. Your drawing will have its own areas that need to be managed, so you don't need to follow my changes here. For those of you who aren't taking my course, the reason I keep reminding you to step back and get some perspective of your drawing is because it's such an important habit to get into, and I believe that repetition is the best way to form new habits. Once my shadow shapes and planes look correct, and I can see volume and structure in my drawing, I'll begin softening my shading using a tortillon. Mine looks a little dirty, so I'll clean the tip off using some light sandpaper. About 150 grade works best. The cleaner your blending tools are, the more control you'll have over the value, tone, and gradients you make with it, so it's important to be vigilant with its care. As usual, I'll begin on the top left and work my way down to the right. This shading should vignette out here on top. I'm just going over each line, softening its edges. There's a very light shadow here. It's so light that you can just borrow some charcoal from this shadow beneath it to add the tone. I'm pulling the charcoal outward so the edge of this shadow doesn't look too stark like a cutout or collage. The value on the front of the nose should be very soft and light. Some of you may be starting to realize that there really is no difference between drawing a nose or lips, or a head or sheet. They're all just subjects made up of lines, planes, and values, so the approach is always similar. Using this technique, you really can draw any solid subject, no matter how complex. That looks good for now. I'll circle back to this shadow over here on the left. Remember the rules of shadows. The closer a shadow is to the object casting it, the harder the edge of the shadow will be. The further it gets away from the object, the softer the edges will be. In fact, I'll switch to my blending stick to soften the edge of this shadow and make sure it blends out naturally. And this shape below it is just a flat tone. There's a lot happening with this next shadow shape, so I'll use my tortillon and a scumbling motion. While I'm doing this, my eyes are darting back and forth from the reference to my drawing, constantly comparing the shapes. Next, I'll soften the nostril shape, then carefully soften the shadow below the nose. Do your best to continue to go around the light shape in there, but if you lose it, you can always come back in with your detail eraser and omit it afterwards. It should be softer here down on the bottom because it's furthest away from the nose. And there's this little shadow line that juts out here. I'll just pull that out with my blending stick. See how defined this edge is up here near the source of the shadow? This light shape can be shaded in a little. It's not as light as the paper, so it will need some tone. There is a plane here, just like the one on the other side of the nose, but the light source is on this side, so it only needs a slight shadow. So all I'm going to do is pull my blending stick across here to give the area about a half a value. That's enough to give this side of the nose some shape and definition. And I'll drag my blending stick right along this line to soften its edge a bit more. And once you have that shape in, you can really define it using your detail eraser. Notice, by the way, I always use the tripod grip with the detail eraser. I hold the pencil closer to the tip and use shorter, controlled strokes, since that is the nature of detail. Observe the right-hand side of this shadow shape. Notice it gradates outward, while the inner side is more defined, almost a hard line. This is the type of nuance that's easily overlooked by someone who isn't taking the time to step back and examine each shadow. But its importance is paramount. Remember, what makes a great drawing isn't doing a few big things, it's dozens of little things that add up. I'll quickly bring in these light creases. Okay, this video is getting too long, so I've broken it up again into a third part to keep the quality and resolution high. So please jump to the next video, Drawing Lips Part 3, for the final part of the exercise where I finish walking you through the shading stages, including adding white charcoal.